Science for Everyday Decisions, series by Center for Sustainable Development at the Earth Institute, Columbia University. For your consideration for a more sustainable life through education for sustainable development.
So I think it's great that the students are able to come up with these ideas and we are able to discuss all of this. It's not so. One question maybe at the end I want to ask Will, who is a science teacher, is whether you were instrumental in giving them the ideas, Will, or whether the students came up with their own ideas. So that's something that's been going on at the back of my mind. So I thought I'll just generally ask. I'll ask William Bortolotti to give us an introduction of his students and the research project. Will?
Awesome. All right. Thanks, Radhika. So my name's Will, and I've really been really lucky to have an incredibly strong cohort of students who sought me out, and every day the magnitude of just energy and enthusiasm and the passion that they have toward their topic has just wowed me, right? And so today, Jaclyn developed this project on fashion and the environment. And my hope is that Jaclyn could share her work with you and her preliminary project ideas, maybe secure some feedback, ideas for next steps. And effectively, I'm really grateful to you for just providing the forum for Jaclyn to present her work. And also, Jaclyn's being supported by Rebecca and Tessa, who are here who are here in support as well. So I guess thank you all, and Jaclyn, thank you for presenting, and look forward to it.
All right. So my project itself is examining the fast fashion industry's impact on the environment. And I wanted to do this just because originally I was already sort of invested in environmental conservation, and when I was researching it, and I just sort of stumbled upon it because it's not something that people tend to look at. People tend to look at more big pictures like automobiles or any kind of like fracking in terms of like things that negatively impact the environment. And this seemed more under the radar, even though technically emissions and pollution from like the production of what the fast fashion industry produces is greater than maritime and like airplane shipping combined. So it was just something that I thought needed more attention. So yeah. Right now, the entire industry itself is something that has to be picked apart, but to start, I want to start with what I started with is basically what parts of it are negatively impacting the environment. So to start off, viscose and rayon, which are two fabrics that are mainly used in fast fashion products. So basically products that come from fast fashion brands like Zara, H&M, Fashion Nova, any of those. They're typically made of pulpwood, which is paper that's used for, which is material that's used for the production of paper. Now, in terms of fabric production in general, the production of cotton, while technically, especially in America and a lot of other countries, has gone down in the fast fashion industry just because it is imported. Cotton typically wastes large amounts of water, despite the fact that cotton is naturally drought resistant. This massive waste of water results in inordinate amounts of water usage. In a study done by BBC, a single cotton jacket required about 2,728 gallons of water, which is 27 years of drinking water for one person. Now, technically, viscose, which is something that is another fast fashion staple, is worse because of the amount of deforestation that happens. Technically, pulpwood is something that has to be very specific types of trees. They have to have very high cellulose, like a very high percentage of cellulose just naturally, even before production, which means that a lot of trees have to be chopped down to make room for pulpwood trees to be produced. And even after these trees are produced and then cut down to be made into fabric, about 70% is scrapped, and 33% of these trees that are being cut down to make room for pulpwood manufacturing come from endangered forests. This tends to produce an imbalance in the environment, just because not only do older trees, which is what they are cutting down, those tend to convert more CO2 into oxygen and take more greenhouse gases out of the atmosphere. What also happens is it's just removing massive amounts of them regardless of age. So deforestation, if you can already tell from how much I've already talked about it, is something that greatly impacts both greenhouse gases and a lot of other factors that I'll talk about later. But as you can see in that visual, that is a visual of the rainforest of Borneo. And the yellow area there is is an area that is now mainly covered with pulpwood and things that are soon to be cut down to make viscose. Any of that gray area tends to just be not only regular amounts of deforestation for things like houses, because of how much like pulpwood they can produce there. It's typically made for factories, and factories tend to run across like water lines, even if there are like small rivers or ponds, just because of that massive need for water. So while I have talked about increased greenhouse gases, which is usually what people talk about when they talk about deforestation, soil erosion and coastal flooding is also a massive problem. Trees provide rich nutrients for topsoil, and once the trees are stripped from the land, the farmers typically abandon the land, and the eroded soil is easily flooded. Now, with farmers abandoning the land, that also means that after a while, farmers are going to start to run out of land that isn't completely eroded, which can then impact the local economies. It kind of shows how connected everything is, from the economy to the environment, and how fast fashion is messing with the balance of all of this. So as much as I have talked about the industry, there is something where you have to find out the inner workings of an industry to truly understand how much of an impact it can have. So in the fast fashion industry, there's something called quick response manufacturing, which is basically how the fast fashion industry is built fast. It allows them to hop on trends, produce, distribute, advertise everything extremely fast. There's actually something where in a lot of legacy brands like Gap and JCPenney and everything there, they typically have about 4 to 5 seasons a year, because that's how many seasons there are in a year, while workers at H&M typically remark that they have 52 seasons a year because they get new shipments of clothing every single week. Now, typically, this is a 4-step process that for legacy brands takes about 2 years to do. Fast fashion brands can easily have this done, depending on how big it is, in about a week, as I said before. There's actually a time with Fashion Nova, how Kim Kardashian wore a particular dress that cost her thousands of dollars, and it was made in Italy, I believe. And Fashion Nova, within 48 hours, had a knockoff of it already up on their site for about $200. So basically, back to the actual topic instead of me just going on a tangent. Quick response manufacturing was popularized by a company named Zara in the 80s, which drastically shortens the amount of time that it takes to put new items on store shelves. Now, through quick response manufacturing, fast fashion brands can imitate designs and jump on trends fast, keep materials on hand, and distribute fast, shortening the process completely. So, why do people want so much so fast? How is fast fashion able to continue as a thriving industry? There's a concept called identity consumerism, which is the idea that people derive a sense of self through what they buy, or in this case, what they wear. This is inherently derived from the concept of social identity theory, which is the idea that the question, who am I, draws people to identify with certain social groups. In short, people use what they buy to identify with those groups, which then allows them to identify with themselves. Now, from a business standpoint, fast fashion is the only branch of the fashion industry that can match this excessive demand that is caused by identity consumerism. Also, if you look at the stock market, the fast fashion sector is either the fastest growing sector in certain years or the only sector that grew in certain years at all. Other sectors for legacy brands typically either go down or stay stagnant because they are typically more stable and slow because they do not pump things out as fast. Fast fashion also allows people to keep up with the rapidly changing, companies can keep up with the rapidly changing minds of consumers. So especially in this kind of fast-paced era, people can like one thing one week and then like a completely different thing another week. And while legacy brands won't be able to keep up with that, fast fashion brands will be able to. So with all of this information, there's something where you have to find out where to apply it, which brings you to two separate directions in terms of where this project could go. One of them is cultural. With all of the psychology outlined with identity consumerism, there is a way to technically reverse the effects of identity consumerism by allowing people to try to find ways to identify with themselves and social groups through something other than what they buy. Now, I am a 14-year-old girl, and I highly doubt that I am going to be able to reverse years upon years of mass consumerism and consumer culture, so I decided to go with the more realistic option, especially one that aligns with my interest in biochemistry, which is process. The actual process itself is what is causing the environmental issues. By finding more sustainable alternative fabrics, less wasteful dyeing methods that would put less pollutants into those rivers that I mentioned, that factories tend to stay next to because of that massive demand of water, and also finding things that wouldn't require that amount of pulpwood. Fast fashion would still be just as fast and profitable, which means that companies wouldn't immediately say no because it would cost them too much money while also being less harmful to the environment. It's like trying to find a sweet spot. So in my hunt for alternative fabrics and things that you could make fabrics out of, I found a study conducted by researcher Susie Suggesti titled Bamboo as Raw Materials for Dissolving Pulp with the Environment-Friendly Technology for Rayon Fiber. Two bamboo species, Sembalang and Mayan, met the requirements for producing rayon. These requirements, the study outlined, was a high cellulose content of 94% post-processing, as well as a lignin content below 20% pre-processing. In a different study by Shinji Ochi titled Tensile Properties of Kenaf Fiber Bundle, Kenaf, which is Hibiscus cannabinus L, proved to be another alternative with these same requirements. As you can see, that cellulose content is pre-processing in that graph, and it's fairly close to the cellulose percentages of bamboo as well as other pulpwoods. So the actual process itself is something that can get a little bit convoluted, especially because different companies tend to use different processes. Currently, there are two known ways of producing fabric from pulpwood, the Kraft process and the sulfite process. Both of these processes, in the simplest of terms, aim to remove the lignin, a polymer within the cell walls of plants that helps you strengthen them between molecules of cellulose. Lignin is technically hydrophobic, which means that it prevents hydrogen bonds from forming in between molecules of cellulose. The more hydrogen bonds there are, the higher the tensile strength, which is what allows these pulpwoods to be turned into fabric. Admittedly, the Kraft process does have a drastically lower level of sulfur dioxide production than the sulfite process, as well as allowing for higher levels of tensile strength. And also, a lot of the gases that are produced other than sulfur dioxide are much easier to sort of, not negate the effect of, but easier to contain. But here's the thing. What if you didn't have to choose between the lesser of two evils? What if there was a way to make using either process completely irrelevant? As stated before, the main purpose of these processes is to remove the lignin bonds, as the production of hydrogen bonds happens independently of human interference once the lignin is removed. If an enzyme was developed to break down lignin or its precursors, or a plant was developed, whether it be through genetic modification or just selective breeding, that didn't have that lignin in their cell walls, it would render the process completely obsolete. So, outside of science and genetic modification, what can we do? Currently, the average American throws out about 80 pounds of clothes per year and buys 68 new clothing items per year, and many are only worn once or twice. Making sure that we are purchasing items that will make good use is the key to cutting down on waste. So technically, if you're buying an item, just ask yourself, am I going to wear this more than just once or twice? And if you have a mountain of clothes in your shopping cart, ask yourself if you really need that much, because being able to cut down on how much you buy is the most important part. And yeah, that's it. Any questions, comments, concerns?
So Jaclyn presented this, and the prompt was, could you do a little bit of background research on your research interests and just share them with us, and let's see what you come up with. And this is it.
Yeah, the way that I really wanted to have this done was, especially because you can see how much I sort of bounced around between the psychology of it and the effects of it and the actual process, it was because I had it all in my head and I had it all in a Google Doc, but that was more chaotic. I wanted something structured, digestible, where I could then edit and critique it and sort of tweak it so that it would be more understandable. And then I found out that I would be doing this presentation, so I figured that I could add it, make it more in depth, and this presentation was born.
This is fantastic, Jaclyn. And just looking at the topic, it's such a perfect sustainable development issue because it has sociology elements in it, it has anthropology, all the, and the science, of course, the science of the fabric itself. It has, popular culture, you name it. It has, a lot of other things that are interwoven. So how are you trying to streamline it, and what is your end? How are you basically, what do you think would be your end result? Like, do you think you want to convince people of using alternative clothing? Is that something that you want to go with, or do you want to go with this popular culture that people have, that okay, trend is suddenly something will come up this spring season and that's completely off, and now you want to go on to some other fashion trend? So just to avoid that consumerism and to avoid the wastefulness of material, or do you want to make people realize that there are certain material that you can buy more consciously, or there are certain people that you can support, or ethically the material is ethically sourced? And so there's so many variations to it. Just wanted to know, how are you trying to streamline this particular issue? And I think it's such a great issue to be working on, and we all need to be your consumers. So finally, when you do your research, we will be very happy to ask you to do a presentation again to see what were your end results and how did you manage to streamline it.
All right, so obviously awareness of what we are buying and how we can sort of make better decisions is something that's very important. And I think especially through the power of social media, I can sort of spread this idea of trying to make sure that you're only buying items that you will get good use of, and making sure to avoid certain fast fashion brands that tend to not really care about the environmental waste that they're like producing. And there's also something where it's a bit of a pipe dream and a bit ambitious, I know, but I wanted to see if I could work alongside certain companies and alongside certain manufacturers to see if once an alternative fabric or alternative process is found, that I could then sort of have them use it, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Great. Thanks, Jaclyn. I think Ayan has a question. Yes.
So I was just wondering, you did all the research about like what's in like the clothes that make them bad for the environment. Do you know any like materials that and like companies that we should like go to, and which companies we should like avoid?
I mean, currently there's certain things where obviously the companies that I named, like H&M and Zara, those companies, even though they do do something called greenwashing, which is basically pretending to be eco-friendly, are companies that you should probably avoid doing, especially because with that thing called greenwashing, it's actually an interesting concept. I'm going to go on a bit of a tangent if you don't mind. So greenwashing is something where companies advertise an eco-friendly line, which basically means like, oh, this dress is made of recycled plastic. Technically, they can say that while only having the dress be made of about 1% recycled plastic, while the other 99% is something there. So going into that kind of background knowledge is something that I want to use. But currently, I believe American Eagle is actually doing something where if you look into their more eco-friendly line, it is something where they aren't just greenwashing, like they're genuinely making an effort to do it. There's also something where legacy brands like Gap and JCPenney and all those other ones that I mentioned are typically like these bigger brands that don't constantly push clothes in, tend to be better just because they don't have to worry about producing things as quickly, cheaply, so they can be more concerned about the quality of the clothing, and also it just tends to be better for the environment because of the materials that they're using.
Okay, thank you.
No
I'll try to
problem.
stay towards those brands. I'll ask my parents to buy those brands. Hey, Jaclyn.
Hold on, you cut out for a second. I didn't hear you.
Hey.
Hey.
This is Kumkum, Ishika's mom. So, reading about your whatever research you have done, what I feel is reducing is the only thing what we can go about, because anything you buy, recycle or non-recycle, it's going to add to the thing, like basically they are not recycling it. Only few percent, like some percentage of it is getting reused, or they factories, whatever, like H&M, even if they are saying they are actually not doing it. Either we can only go for the cotton stuff, or we can reduce the number of buying.
Hold on, I think you're cutting out a little, but from what I can hear, with a lot of fabrics, I know that I mentioned cotton being big on water wastage. If you really want to go with lesser of like the lessers of two evils, for a lot of things, certain polyesters, polyester itself, I know I didn't get into it in this presentation, polyester is actually partially made of petroleum, which is pretty much even worse than the deforestation, just because of the amount of pollutants that it does put in the air. While also still, because of those factors, it still does contribute to deforestation. It still does pollute rivers. So I think if you want to go lesser two evils, cotton is good, as well as, again, I am still looking into alternative fabrics, but from what I currently know, cotton is one of the better of them, while polyester is one of the worst. Viscose was actually originally produced as an alternative to polyester, which is why a lot of people aren't looking into an alternative to viscose, because originally viscose was the solution, and then people didn't understand that that does still cause massive amounts of deforestation. So you have to find another alternative, if that makes any sense.
Mm-hmm. I think reduction is the only thing where everybody, and I feel it, it's my take, that reduction can only reduce the pollution, because anything you use, even the cotton, if you are using it, requires a lot of water. It takes a lot of water to make the cotton. So people should actually reduce the number of items, whatever they are buying.
Yeah, that's exactly it, really, because even on, like, from what I said at the end, even outside of like the science of it and me trying to find a different fabric to use that wouldn't be as bad, it is something where just every single person can just watch what they're buying and make sure that what they're buying is good and cutting down on waste.
Presentation. If you don't mind, I just wanted to share this one link here. It's from a brand called Reformation. I just came across it because I was looking up about sustainable fabric. Here, let me share it in the chat so that everyone could maybe also take a look at the chart. But this company, they published their own report on how other standards are rating their company on sustainability practices. But they also have this really helpful link of, they grade all the different fabrics A, B, C, D. And then it showed the types of fabrics that this company is trying to use. But I thought it was just very helpful to just see, to get an understanding of how their company practices are, what they're doing. And then this chart kind of outlines, even if we're consuming from other brands, these are maybe the type of fabrics we should look for in the composition label of different fabrics and clothing. So I just put it in the chat in case that's of interest to anyone.
All right, thank you. Just because that's going to be a really good resource for me just to understand, even because different brands tend to have different processes for it. So it's going to be really helpful to understand exactly what each company is doing.
And one question for you is, while you were researching, was there any information on the cost of the different processing, like going to these more like sustainable practices, eco-friendly practices for the company? Do some of the different processes that you talked about in terms of manufacturing, are they more costly, or do they not make a huge difference to what's currently being done in the fashion?
Currently, with the different processes like the craft process versus the sulfite process, in terms of cost effectiveness, I can't say which is better, but I do know that the craft process does just in general produce higher quality fabric, which is why a lot of companies tended to switch over to the craft process. So just based on that, I would assume that it wouldn't be inordinately more expensive to use the craft process.
Mm-hmm.
I noticed too that the document they mentioned still under review camel hair, and I think that's almost like harsher than wool, and it's almost as if like we need to take into account, I guess, the material properties of the different, I guess, components of the fabric too.
I mean, obviously there's something where a lot of things other than cotton and things that are grown, like there is fur, but then that's also you're getting into animal cruelty, you're getting into a whole lot of other stuff that I would rather stray away from in terms of finding an alternative.
I think that's what's so eye-opening about, I guess, what you shared, was just, I really never grasped how interconnected all of these systems are between, I guess, the consumerism being a product of just social values, and then the science behind just all the environmental impacts of creating these clothes, right? I found it really informative on my end.
Very, very informative and also very difficult to tackle, because where do you start and what are the different things, that there's so many different dimensions to it that it becomes difficult to even, approach. So I think, Jaclyn, you really have done a solid homework to see how you can tackle this and what is the current situation. I was looking at actually Columbia University. I heard that there were some scientists who were working on the type of material very similar to what you are discussing. Just here is the link if you want to email these professors or see what they are working on. I think that might be a good start to see what are other people working at and how you can contribute to the research that they are not doing and fill the gaps. But even, on a just more on the sociological or anthropological perspective, even if you take do a interview of different people, you'll get a sense of what they prefer and why they prefer, because also it is also very, people have their different background. So what is it that's promoting them or encouraging them to not go and buy fast fashion? For me, it is definitely, cotton, but that's my Indian heritage, because we essentially, it's so hot in India that using polyester was just very difficult. So we, used cotton. But now coming here, I've switched to something like, again, I try to reuse and not buy in every season, and, try to do second-hand clothes for my kids and other things. We try to do some clothes swap here in Melbourne with some other friends who organize it. So again, what is the driver of switching from one fabric to the other, and what is the driver for reducing? Maybe if you can do interviews or surveys that you can send out just to get people's perspective, because everyone will come up with their own version of what they want to do. and just throwing some ideas. And but this is of course not science; it's more social science. So with the science perspective, maybe you want to contact some, fashion scientists who are working on fast fashion, and then some plastic related research that people are focusing on. It's definitely something that I've seen lately. It was not there earlier on, or at least it was not in fashion. This research was not in fashion earlier on. So you're definitely on the right track, and I'm sure there's lots to be done here. So where do you go from here now, Jaclyn? What are your colleagues who are also here, your research mates, if they want to discuss anything or add to anything that you are working on, Jaclyn?
I mean, currently with the direction that I want to go on is attempting to find an alternative way of producing fabric and an alternative source of fabric. And right now that is something that I will have to research more in depth, just going forward. Like currently I was originally just looking at the effects of it, and then I had to actually like dissect the process itself, and it's just a whole snowball of things that you have to understand to be able to apply it and start looking. So now that I have that background knowledge, I think now I can move forward and see if I can find that alternative source.
Mm-hmm. We have this, I'll send you this link of this person who she's actually one of Joachim Goz's student. And her name is Emmeline. I'll send you the link to our website, and she has been suggesting that cotton, like natural fibers like hemp, is something that could be a good alternative, but we don't know the costing, and there are many questions, because her side was like which material she had done the summer study where she was trying to test the plastic content of the the material itself. And so polyester was the maximum plastic, and there was this whole range, cotton was below, and the most sustainable was hemp based on her research. Of course, there can be many contradictions, and this research is evolving. So I'll send you a link to our website. It's ED for SD, and if you look at one of the Science for Everyday Decisions videos, Emmeline is there as one of the people who were interviewed. So maybe you can look at that interview and see if you get some more ideas on the fabric type, and you can actually speak to her. So if you want to speak to her, I am happy to connect her to you, and she can just discuss her work. Again, it was very preliminary. I'm not sure if she did this in detail, but at least it will be a good start of talking to people and see how you can work on this particular area. That's helpful.
And Radhika and Jaclyn, also in the chat box, I had put in another interview we did with Dana Cohen. So she's less of a researcher herself, but she's more of a designer. So she comes from more from a fashion perspective in the discussion. So that interview is also in the link. I think those two resources should be really interesting for you as you continue the research on this.
Great. Any other question? Ishika, any question from you?
No.
No? Okay. Any other questions from anyone? I think this is fascinating. If you want to write a blog or something, Jaclyn, based on your research, let us know. We will be happy to post it on ED for SD, our ED for SD website. I think, for me, writing helps me to streamline things, because then you're processing these thoughts, because otherwise you are exploding with all these thoughts. And then when you start writing, or maybe making a PowerPoint presentation, that also goes equally. Presenting your ideas to people and seeing what questions they have and organizing your thoughts, that you've already done all this work. But if you feel that you want to write a short blog or something, that's again something that is open, if that helps at this stage.
And Jaclyn, as this research develops, we would really love to hear like some of your new findings. What pieces are you linking together after talking to some of the people in the field and researchers? It would be really great to hear updates on this research that you started.
All right.
Thanks so much for this forum and just for the feedback. This is great.
I think it's very, very inspirational to hear all of you who are presenting and have all these amazing ideas. And I think it's wonderful. I think we get to learn a lot, Will. So it's completely our, benefit to our benefit. So I wanted to actually share this blog post that we had a couple of us have written. Again, just to show that definitely send in your ideas and send in your writing pieces. So there was this article in The Guardian about how COVID-19, its links to loss of biodiversity and COVID-19.
Hmm.
And it was a very interesting piece. So that original article is also in there. And these are our reflections of how we have processed this COVID-19, and for us, what was important. How was biodiversity loss connected or not connected to where we are right now? So just thought of sharing it right now. If you have other ideas on blogs, if you have other ideas on, again, fashion related work or anything else that you would want to share, definitely feel free to write. And of course, it always helps presenting ideas and having discussions, further discussions. Um, any other last thoughts from anyone? And then Will, over to you if you have other thoughts you want to present or other ideas. And you are very close to your students, and your this research is constantly evolving. So I don't know if you have any other ideas that you want to add on at this stage.
I guess just on my end, I just thank you again, and just the kudos to you, Jaclyn, and thanks Tessa, Rebecca, thanks for showing. I guess really it's a it's we were just saying how this abrupt shift in life has just been so jarring, and it's I guess one tether to I guess normalcy and optimism has just been these students. How every session we have, they're just bouncing with energy, ideas. They're talking with each other, giving each other feedback, cheering each other on, right? Challenging each other positively. And it's that type of energy that we just can't afford to lose. And that it's like that type of energy is just such a wellspring of positivity. And so I guess on my end, I guess thank you for just being able to experience, like what I guess very passionate, enthusiastic young researchers like you are capable of.
So, and again, like what Mr. Bortolotti said, I would just like to thank everybody here for giving me all of these suggestions and links and just resources and ways to advance through my process. And I am very grateful for that.
Thank you so much, Jaclyn. What we'll do is either you can copy the links from here, because as soon as the chat ends, the links also go away. But I'm sure I don't think you've been able to copy all the links. So we'll share. I don't know. We can share, right? The chat gets downloaded also, right? Yes. So we'll share the chat links with you separately, and we'll record, of course, this video so that we can share it with other students. And it's going to be very inspirational for other students to hear your presentation, Jaclyn, because you have come up with this fascinating topic, and there will be many students who are thinking on the same line. So your approach of how you are having done all the homework, where you're headed, I think will be a good way for others to get inspired and follow your lead. And maybe you never know, later on you might get a lot of collaborators, and you might get a lot of people who are doing similar research, and you will be able to make your own community and make your own friends through your work. Great. Thank you so much for today's session. And we have another student presenting their work tomorrow and this whole week. We also have a presentation this Saturday by a journalist who's covering COVID-19 in India. And I think it will be interesting to know from his perspective what the story that's evolving on the topic itself, as well as some career tips on how we can present our ideas in the most interesting way, and what helped them to become journalists in the first place. And I thought that that will be also a very inspirational talk on Saturday at 10 o'clock. It's not our usual 4 p.m. Saturday is at 10 because the person is in India, and 4 p.m. is very late for them. So he'll be joining us on Saturday in the morning to really inspire us to see what is a typical day like for a journalist who's covering a very critical story, and how can we learn from his experience on writing, covering a very important topic. And then of course we have this whole week filled with a lot of interesting presentations that we can all learn from. I hope everyone joins back again at 4 p.m. every day, and hope to get inspired by everyone who's presenting this week. So thank you so much, and we'll see you tomorrow at 4, same time.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank
Really
you.
nice.